A distinguished lawyer, published author, philanthropist, accomplished speaker and scholar, we are proud to present to you our commencement speaker for the evening, Dr. Aditya Sondhi. Dr. Sondhi is a first-generation lawyer who has built up a reputation for his unimpeachable integrity and keen intellect. He is what his well-wishers would call a rare breed of talent and a thoughtful human being. Aditya was born in Bengaluru on 18th July 1975 to Ravi and Beena Sondhi. Legend has it that Aditya came out of the womb kicking and screaming while playing a glorious left-handed cover drive with all the personality and attitude of a born leader. An excellent cricketer and actor, Dr. Sondhi was the school captain of the Bishop Cotton Boys' School. He has served as a mentor and an inspiration to many generations of young Cottonians. He is an alumnus of the National Law School of India University and holds a PhD in political science from the University of Mysore. After building a successful practice in the Karnataka High Court, he was appointed as a senior advocate in 2014, and 2 years later, he was designated as the Additional Advocate General of Karnataka. In February this year, the Supreme Court Collegium approved the proposal for the elevation of Dr. Sondhi as a judge of the Karnataka High Court. Apart from his achievements as a lawyer, Dr. Sondhi is a passionate person who invests his heart and soul into many of his interests. He loves to read, travel, and explore every city he visits. His travels include an annual pilgrimage to Twickenham Stadium in London to watch rugby. A man with versatile talents and a lover of arts, he grew up playing the tabla and practicing theatre. Everyone who knows him considers him to be a straightforward person and as someone who looks out for the people he cares about. He is the founder of the General K.S. Thimayya Memorial Lectures, and he has been a big supporter of NSOJ since its inception. He has also previously served on our advisory board. The National School of Journalism is honored and privileged to present our commencement speaker and guest of honor, Dr. Aditya Sondhi.
Gosh, where did you get those photographs from? You all are not just journalists, but investigative journalists. You've made me nervous. I don't know what else you know about me. Tim, Niru, Asha, Mrs. Franklin, Professor Baba Prasad, Professor Simon, members of the faculty, parents, alumni, and of course, dear graduating students. Am I audible? Oh, sorry, I thought I was on Zoom. This is probably the first physical event I'm doing in a year and a half or two. And it's a great privilege to be at the NSOJ. As you heard in the introduction, I have been associated with you in different capacities, mostly as a friend of Timothy, whose generosity knows no bounds, and he's had me over in one capacity or the other. And now as a commencement speaker to this very fine and talented graduating batch, as I can tell from the introductions that were made by Professor Baba Prasad and Mrs. Franklin. Your emphasis on power and restraint strikes me as something central and true. I presented Tim recently with a book on his birthday by Janet Malcolm called The Journalist and the Murderer. She was a journalist with the New Yorker, and you'd wonder who the journalist and who the murderer are. She writes about a journalist, Mr. Joe McInnes, who undertook to write a biography of sorts of a captain from the Special Forces in the US, someone called Dr. Jeffrey MacDonald, who incidentally is the murderer in question, who was convicted for having murdered his pregnant wife and 2 daughters. And she begins her book with a very telling statement, which I read to you. Every journalist who is not too stupid or too full of himself to notice what is going on knows that what he does is morally indefensible. These are rather provocative words. If I was to say that, you would be clearly upset. But this comes to you from a journalist. And you wonder why she says that, why this scathing indictment of her own fellow tribe. And that's because in the guise of writing a biography of this convicted murderer, the journalist in question set him up with the impression that he was a friend, got close to him, manipulated him into sharing his world, had him believe over a period of years that the book was going to be, well, if not laudatory, at least the version of this gentleman. The convict thought it was going to be a sort of vindication of his take on the trial and his sense of injustice. But ultimately what came out was a sort of scathing version that painted this murderer in even worse light. And he took the journalist to court. And funnily enough, before a jury, the sympathy was more with the murderer, as it were, the plaintiff, than with the journalist. And to me, this may be an extreme case, but it's still a very striking anecdote, as it were, of what lies at the heart of journalism. And I was hopeful that Tim would have a series of lectures around this book. I read it before I gave it to you, so it's kind of second-hand in that sense. But a fascinating account of the sort of moral dilemmas, and in some cases the sheer lack of moral consciousness when it comes to dealing with your subjects. And therefore I would first ask you to reflect on what sort of journalist you want to be. I assume that many, if not most of you from the graduating batch will indeed take to the profession of journalism. And this is where your moral standards are going to be the distinguishing factor, as it were. That, I believe, is the case with all professionals, but more so with journalists who are at the forefront of the business of truth. And your take on the themes that you pick up, the stories that you do, has to reflect that sense of professional ethics. Are your subjects there to be manipulated, to be sort of, seduced even into sharing their stories? Or do you draw some lines? And I think this becomes extremely important in the manner in which you conduct yourself. I do believe that your objectivity in dealing with your subjects is going to stand you in good stead. Now, when we say be objective, it doesn't mean be morally neutral. You have every right to have a moral position on the subjects that you cover. But a moral position ought not to be confused or conflated with prejudice. And I think that's where I would like to see the NSOJ products, the graduating batch and the batches to come, to walk this thin line. And people have done it. It is going to be this acute awareness that you are required to have of what your ethical expectations are, and also how far you will go. Being objective can't be an excuse to be casual, right? Being prejudiced is what? Is basically slotting. It's slotting people, which is lazy journalism. It's easy to do, right? Even in our conversations, we tend to slot more often than not. But I want to say to you that when you slot, you also get slotted. And that's exactly what you should be aware of. You've seen that with the Fox versus CNN sort of thing in the US. We have our own examples here, where even before you can either read or listen to a story, simply because of the channel you're watching or the paper you're reading, you already know what the take is going to be. To me, that's frightening. I want to be able to read a story or listen to a story or watch a story to know something new and original that I haven't been privy to. And trust me, a consumer of that news takes that at face value. No matter how sophisticated your audience may be, at the end of the day, people have enough and more on their minds, and by instinct tend to assume that what is being said to them by a responsible journalist is true and fair. And therefore, please understand that your role in society, your role in the immediate community is extremely important. And don't get carried away with the cancel culture that seems to have emerged now, because you have that power, right? You speak of power and restraint. While exercising that power, also have that sense of balance and restraint in what you write about and who you write about and what tone you write about them in. I've seen careers and reputations destroyed simply at the stroke of a pen. And that's where I would urge you again, while you must feel uplifted knowing that you have this power in you, simply on account of the profession that you belong to, exercise that restraint and balance while you write and speak and cover the subjects and the individuals that you do. Reflect also on how far you would go as a professional, right? We're speaking on the one hand about restraint and objectivity, and then you have the case of Danish Siddiqui recently, who you know was killed in the line of fire, a fine photojournalist from India, killed in Afghanistan. And Afghanistan is going to be your next big story. The Taliban are back in Kandahar. That was their stronghold a decade or two ago, and they're back. And they're not far from Kabul. And what ramifications that has on the sort of national security issues in the larger geopolitics of that area is a fantastic area for you to cover. But in terms of individual stories, reflect on people who've gone before you and literally been vanquished in the line of duty. I mean, those are heroes, right? I have recently read about a journalist by the name of Keshav in Kurnool district who covered the Gutka scam. And he wrote about, ironically, a constable who was involved in the illegal Gutka trade. And he was stabbed to death with a screwdriver in cold blood by the constable, if the allegation is true, and the arrest has been made. So you therefore carry a heavy burden. You don't carry a heavy burden only in terms of the canvas you have and the role you play, but also personally. I hope I'm not frightening the parents here, but I do believe that's a burden many of us professionals carry. Lawyers do that. Other folks in public life do that. And you will therefore reflect, I hope, on your role there. You will wisely and maturely look at what you do. Fortune favors the brave, and I would urge you, while looking after yourselves, to try and push the envelope, to try and uncover that story which is yet to be broken. After all, news is what today? It's anyone with a Twitter account is a journalist in a sense, right? The facts are available. I've seen so many stories in the media which are basically a cut and paste of other people's tweets. Why do I need to read that? I can easily log on to Twitter and read it for myself. And that's where your depth of study, your ability to find original topics, some of whom Professor Baba referred to, the ivory trade, coffee, Rohingyas, etc. And to do that in long form, right? Writing itself is a dying art. Twitter, Facebook, वगैरह have made us lazy. We use WhatsApp language. I just gave Timothy a book by Sir Harold Evans where he speaks of essential English for journalists. But it's not about English per se. I think it's about the depth with which you write. I hope that many of you will write in the vernacular. English is overestimated. I don't think English does justice to a lot of themes that we see in our country and our state around us. And while writing, I also hope that you will assume not just the right language, but the right voice, right? As I said, you're dealing with subtle societal issues. and the manner in which you deal with issues of caste and disability and gender and sexuality and poverty, I think are going to distinguish you. People, while reading you, will expect a sense of empathy. Why is P. Sainath a different and an exceptional journalist? It's exactly for this extraordinary empathy that he brings to stories. I saw that the Hindu over the past couple of years, I think, has changed the manner in which it covers death by suicide. There are newspapers that cover suicide with graphic cartoons of somebody hanging from it's a trigger almost, and it's obnoxious. Whereas I've noticed that the Hindu and some other papers have moved from that paradigm. They write about it responsibly, they cover it gently, there are no ugly photographs to, disparage the dead. And they, at the end, write about the scope for you to reach out to a self-help group. And as you know, today, mental health is a big deal. And this is not even subtle. I think this is a voice change. It's not a language change. It's a thematic change in the manner in which you deal with issues such as this. And I hope that you will bring that sensitivity to your writing and coverage in the years to come. I read a very interesting book by Ronan Farrow called Catch and Kill. He actually sort of covered the Harvey Weinstein Me Too scandal and sort of blew the lid on it. And catch and kill is a phrase that I learned that is used in American media predominantly about how corporate media buys out stories and kills them for a price, right? And he suffered that. He suffered that persecution and alienation because he says that his own bosses were not willing to back him when it came to covering such an explosive story. But you may very well even face that in your professions. Remember, you're not necessarily going to be freelance independent journalists from day one, right? You're going to be associated with media houses. This is a paradox that even the legal profession faces. You want to intern with the biggest firms and corporations, but then you also have to reflect as to where you're going to work and how much intellectual and ideological independence you're going to have in those spaces, right? I mean, the timing is not lost on me. It's Independence Day tomorrow, and you have to think about how much independence indeed you will have in the course of your duties. After all, you are citizens first, and today journalists are saying it's not enough to be a journalist. I am a citizen. You saw that. You saw that sharply in the US when sort of, there was that run on the White House and in Washington and so on. And you saw that journalists were unable to contain themselves. That is going to be a pointed debate that will go on. It's a debate, again, something that the legal profession also grapples with. Who's the advocate? Who's the activist? Where does the line get drawn? Where does my personal morality come in conflict with my professional requirements? And these are things we deal with every day. And I'm rather certain that each of you in this new era, and this era is it's not even a generational era. I believe things are changing around us phenomenally quickly. So things are going to change around you almost maybe on a yearly or on a 2-yearly basis. And when I say change, I don't just mean technology and COVID and so on. I mean structural changes, the sort of moral dilemmas that society will throw upon you, the challenges that it will throw upon you. You know today that families have fallen out over political differences and so on. So the polarization and the urge and the need to speak out and express yourself are all issues that I believe are heightened today. And you're going to face that in the course of your profession as a journalist. Not easy, but I do believe it's important for me to flag that for you today, because that consciousness must come now. If you don't carry that consciousness, you're going to be quickly influenced by somebody else's consciousness, right? Your immediate editor, hopefully you will work with the right and the good people, and therefore those influences will be positive, but nobody can guarantee that. And therefore, it's good if you have that basic core of your priorities, your standards in place before you hit the world, hit the ground running, and start your professions, because then you have a filter to test everything that you're consuming. Else, you're far easier going to be prone to influence. I do want to say a couple of things before I wrap up. Tim was clear, 30 minutes is 30 minutes, but I don't even know where I am right now. But I'll take 5 more minutes to say a couple of things that I want to share with you. Another book that I've started reading recently is by Alan Rusbridger, who was the editor-in-chief of The Guardian. And he has written this book called Breaking News, The Remaking of Journalism and Why It Matters Now. I wish I had read it fully before I could speak to you. I'd have a lot more serious things to say, I think. But just reading the early parts of his book, he speaks of the virus, as he calls it, of fake news. And obviously, this is something you are fully cognizant of. And he gives the example of a series of tweets that he came across in the US, which built up this story about Islamophobia in Sweden, which ultimately discovered was patently false. But the interesting thing that he says is that after reading tweets which suggested this Islamophobia, he found that those tweets had been retweeted perhaps several thousand or maybe a few million times. And when he tried to go to responsible media to corroborate this, he was hit by paywalls. And he therefore had to spend good money to try and get the other side. How many folks would do that? So you've got fake news and paid news on the one side, and you've got a paywall on the other. And what is it they say about a lie going halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes, right? This is a classic example. And that's where I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, what is media and what is the news today? Is it that tweet which has already gone around the world and been believed by most and a fait accompli? Or is it that responsible investigative journalist who's taken his or her time, written a piece, and then shared it, unfortunately, on a paid channel or a paid website? Where is the truth then? What is the news and where is the truth? And that's the pursuit that's going to involve you. You're in that race, right? Your sense of justice that you spoke about is going to draw you to one or the other. And everyone has a sense of belief that what they say or what they see or what they hear is the truth. But the truth is often more complex and nuanced than that. And that's where I think you will see a new paradigm of media reporting, where sometimes the truth may even be a casualty in the short run. But at the end of the day, if you do have the ability to uncover it for what it is and share it, and hopefully share it far and wide, you would be doing a great public service in the course of your profession. Ultimately, the last thing I want to say is that I hope that some of you will take up legal reporting. I've seen over these years the need and the vacuum in the legal reporting sphere, simply because I do believe it's a sub-specialization. I don't think you can just walk into court or log into a hearing and assume you're a legal reporter. I'm sorry, it's a little more serious than that. And while legal reporting, you have the ability to mold public opinion, right? People speak of media trials. Yes, they're a reality. Well, if you're conducting a media trial, then for God's sake, conduct it well. And your obligation then to be fair to a subject, to be fair to an accused, to be fair to the court is crucially important. I've seen some reporters who don't know the difference between an oral observation made by a judge, a query posed by the court, or a written order and judgment. Clearly, they are different things. But when you have ball-by-ball coverage, every question and every casual remark of one judge on a bench of 3 suddenly becomes the order of the court. And as I come back to the point I made, that your consumer may be lazy. Your consumer is going to go by the first tweet that he or she sees. And if that tweet tells them that this is the question that the court has put and that is a done deal, it has a very serious systemic effect. You see, faith in the system is crucial, especially in the legal system, in the judicial system. And therefore, if you are inclined to report on legal matters. I would urge you very strongly to take that role seriously. I believe NSOJ is cultivating or has already cultivated a curriculum around it, and that ought to be taken to its logical end. It can't be done in a light-hearted manner, because it will reflect upon your credibility as it would on the system. So with these words, friends, I thank you once over for this very kind invitation. The lights are absolutely dazzling, so I hope I was not completely incoherent, but I want to thank you for having me here. I want to wish not just each of you, but the National School of Journalism the very best. It's a young institution. I have seen Tim and Mrs. Franklin and the family, and when I say family, I mean the extended family of the faculty, give it more than what is expected from them. And they're doing it not, I believe, for any personal gain, but it is a sort of a game changer, in my opinion. But that is going to ride on you. Young institutions ride on their alumni very strongly. I said this last time around. That was the experience with the National Law School as well. Today, it's spoken of highly and so on, but there was a time when it was a startup, and therefore the connect that you have with the institution, I believe, will be important. So be good ambassadors for NSOJ. Be critical if you must. There's no harm. That's how institutions improve. But be, again, fair, be friendly, and keep that sort of connection with the institution regardless of where you practice, because that's important. It's good for you, it's a springboard for you, and it's also good for the journalism school. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, sir, for your inspiring words. There's so much to take away and reflect on all that you have spoken. We aspire to be responsible journalists who are true and fair. Thank you so much.